You won't believe what happened when MrBeast found out his driver, the guy who had been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make his massive charity projects possible, didn't have a place to call home. It all started with one simple conversation and ended in a life-changing moment neither of them will ever forget. You've probably heard of MrBeast. If you haven't, he's the guy who gives away millions of dollars to strangers, builds massive food banks, and creates jaw-dropping challenges that bring people together from all over the globe. But even someone as generous as him has moments that stop him in his tracks. Moments that remind him there are still hidden struggles right under our noses, struggles most of us never see coming. This story starts with a man named James. James wasn't famous. He didn't have millions of followers or a YouTube channel. What he did have was a quiet determination to work hard every single day. For months, he'd been driving for MrBeast, shuttling around crew members, equipment, and supplies for some of the biggest stunts and charity events you've seen online. James was reliable, always on time, and never complained, even when the hours were long or the weather was bad. But one evening, after wrapping up filming for one of MrBeast's latest projects, something unusual happened. Jimmy, also known as MrBeast, hopped into the car and noticed James seemed off. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes looked tired, not just physically but emotionally drained. Curious, Jimmy asked him how things were going. At first, James brushed it off, saying everything was fine. But Jimmy could tell something wasn't right. So, he pressed a little more. "James, seriously, what's going on? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." That's when James hesitated. And then, quietly, almost too softly for Jimmy to hear, he admitted the truth. He didn't have a home. James explained that he'd fallen on tough times. He'd lost his apartment months ago and had been living out of his car ever since. Every night, while everyone else went back to their houses or apartments, James parked somewhere quiet, trying to get a few hours of sleep before starting another long day of work. He hadn't told anyone because he was ashamed. He didn't want pity. All he wanted was to keep working and provide for himself. Jimmy sat there in silence for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then, without missing a beat, he said 3 words that would change everything. "We're fixing this." The next morning, Jimmy called an emergency meeting with his team. He explained James's situation and made it clear that this wasn't just about helping someone, it was about doing what was right. "We can't let someone who works so hard for us live like this," he said, "not on my watch." At first, the team brainstormed small solutions. Maybe they could pool some money to help James get a hotel room for a few nights, or find him temporary housing. But Jimmy shook his head. "No," he said firmly, "this isn't a band-aid fix. We're not just giving him a roof over his head tonight. We're making sure he has stability moving forward." That's when things got interesting. Jimmy decided to take matters into his own hands. First, he invited James to sit down and talk openly about what he needed most. James admitted that finding affordable housing had been nearly impossible. Even though he worked hard, saving enough for a security deposit, and rent felt like climbing a mountain without any gear. Jimmy listened carefully, then came up with a plan. He announced that the company would cover James's living expenses until he got back on his feet. But Jimmy didn't stop there. Knowing how much James valued independence, he told him, "You're family now. And families don't just give handouts, they create opportunities." With that, Jimmy surprised James by arranging interviews for better-paying jobs within the company. Jobs that came with benefits, including health insurance and retirement plans. It wasn't charity, it was empowerment. But here's where things got even more emotional. While all of this was happening, Jimmy realized something else. James wasn't alone. There were likely dozens or even hundreds of other people working tirelessly behind the scenes in similar situations. People struggling silently because they were too proud or too scared to ask for help. So Jimmy did what he does best. He turned one act of kindness into something bigger. Within days, he announced a new initiative aimed at helping others facing homelessness, not just in his company but across the community. The goal, to provide not only shelter but also resources to help people rebuild their lives. James watched all of this unfold with tears in his eyes. He couldn't believe how much had changed in such a short time. Just weeks earlier, he'd been sleeping in his car, wondering if anyone would ever notice. Now, thanks to Jimmy's generosity, he finally had hope, not just for himself, but for others like him. As the days turned into weeks, James settled into his new apartment. For the first time in months, he slept soundly in a real bed. He started his new role at the company, feeling more motivated than ever before. And every day he reminded himself how lucky he was to have crossed paths with someone like Jimmy. But just when it seemed like everything was falling into place, something unexpected happened. Just as James was settling into his new life, Jimmy surprised him again. But this time it wasn't just about stability. It was about gratitude. One afternoon, Jimmy called James into his office. James walked in, unsure of what to expect. Had he done something wrong? Was there a problem with the new job? Instead, Jimmy stood up, smiled, and handed him an envelope. "Open it," Jimmy said simply. Inside was a letter, a heartfelt note, thanking James for everything he'd done for the team over the months. But that wasn't all. Beneath the letter was a check. A big one, enough to wipe out any remaining debt James had accumulated during his toughest times. James froze, staring at the check in disbelief. "I don't know what to say," he stammered. "You don't have to say anything," Jimmy replied. "You've worked hard, James. You deserve this. And honestly, you've inspired me to do more, not just for you but for everyone out there who feels like they're stuck." Tears welled up in James's eyes as he tried to process what was happening. He thought back to those long nights, sleeping in his car, wondering if anyone would ever notice how hard he was trying. Now, here he was, standing face to face with someone who hadn't just noticed but had gone above and beyond to change his life forever. Word of Jimmy's actions spread quickly through the company and beyond. Employees were moved by the gesture, and fans online couldn't stop talking about it. People started sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience, inspired by James's journey and Jimmy's kindness. The initiative Jimmy launched to help others facing homelessness gained traction faster than anyone expected. Donations poured in from viewers around the world, eager to support the cause. For James, this was more than just a second chance. It was proof that even in your darkest moments, there are people willing to step up and make a difference. He threw himself into his work with renewed energy, determined to pay forward the kindness he'd received. In fact, he became one of the program's most passionate advocates, helping connect others in need with the resources they desperately needed. As weeks turned into months, Jimmy checked in regularly with James, making sure he was adjusting well to his new life. During one of these conversations, James looked Jimmy straight in the eye and said, "You didn't just save me. You reminded me that I still matter, that my life has value. I'll never forget that." Jimmy nodded, but deep down, he knew the real hero of this story wasn't him. It was James, someone who, despite everything stacked against him, kept showing up, kept working, and kept believing that things could get better. And so, James's story became a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter how tough things seem, there's always a way forward. Sometimes, all it takes is one person noticing, caring, and deciding to act. But here's the thing, James's story isn't over. Neither is Jimmy's mission to help others, because for every James out there, there's another person waiting for someone to notice them too, waiting for their turn to be seen, heard, and helped. Which brings us to today, and to you. What will you do when you see someone struggling? Will you look away, or will you step up? If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone else. Maybe it'll inspire them to make a difference in their own corner of the world. If you want to hear more stories like this, or if you're curious about how Jimmy continues to change lives, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness doesn't have to cost much, but it can mean everything to someone in need. Until next time.